Cyberpunk 2077, the most anticipated game of 2020 and probably the last like 5 or so years. It was this slow escalation to a release that was met with all kinds of reactions. I'm going to be approaching this review from a book reviewer perspective in a way to try to add something different to the conversation that's already happening here. There are so many reviews out there, a lot of them from people who didn't even have time to complete the game and never got review copies. Just putting that out there. And we're gonna get into the good and the bad. We're gonna start with some of the good first. I really adored this game's atmosphere and as a whole liked its storytelling. Now, the storytelling's a bit difficult to get into because I'm not just talking about the main narrative. Anyone who's played this game knows that's like 30% of the game. The rest of it is side gigs, little offshoot stories, just witnessing the environment around you. This all comes together to be one of the most rich video games I've ever played in terms of a plethora of story to digest. Not all of it is very good, and this actually does lend easily into a criticism. The game does not distinguish between like interesting plot-driven small side missions that can actually really bring something interesting to the surface and just show up and shoot some people. That's the thing. There's no real even dialogue. Just kill these guys. It doesn't really differentiate between those at all. So if you're in the mood to just do some shooting, you can accidentally get involved with like a 20-minute little thing that has some neat character stuff going on. But if you don't particularly like those characters, it can feel like you're just in a trench. Whereas if you're kind of looking for something like that and you're just kind of cycling through some gigs to figure out what could be neat, unfortunately, you can just show up to gang after gang after gang, or small steal a thing, small break into a fort. And yeah, there's always these details that are neat, and you can always enjoy the atmosphere, which again is magnificent. But as a whole, it just kind of became messy in this sense. But when the game shines, it glows like a beacon of light. There are missions that feel like they're incomplete. Those are the worst part of the game, where you feel like, there was going to be something bigger here, but it just falls off. The biggest example is there's a character who's introduced, you have a clash with them, and then the next time you see them, you have sex with them, and that's it. It's just like, okay, we're done here. That was all. There was definitely something more planned with that character, but because of the rush release date, it seems like they had to just go, you hook up with them, it's over. If I had to compare the story to that of like an actual traditional book, it can't really be made, and that's one of the beauties of the mediums of video game. You get to have a messier story, but because you are directly controlling what lines you follow as the player, it doesn't feel that way, because, you're invested in Pan Am and that romance, go that way. The best I can say is it has a lot of beautiful moments, some of the best storytelling I've seen in games at times, as well as just unpolished, unfinished entire arcs. So if I had to come at it from like Daniel's doing a book review, I'd say it's like a 6 out of 10, but in maybe the most polarized manner I have ever seen from like a crafting a narrative perspective. There's a lot coming out about how the devs were saying this game is not done, and they essentially put it out now to hit a holiday deadline. And we'll get into more of that with the final thoughts here. But okay, closing up story and atmosphere. Again, some of the actual like best storytelling I've seen in a game like this at moments, and that is largely dependent on the characters. Whether it's Jackie, Pan Am, or Judy, these people like I connected with more as video game characters than I have since probably like Mass Effect 2. That's the only game that comes to mind for me, granted I don't play a ton of games, where I was like, yes, these characters, I feel like I know them, they are consistent, they're well acted enough that I am into it. It's just, you need to really search for those 10 out of 10 moments and wade through a lot of like 4 to 7 out of 10. It's tricky. And as a whole, like the aesthetic of the game, that built atmosphere I've mentioned, is extraordinary. As someone who just read Neuromancer and rewatched Blade Runner, this is probably the most lively cyberpunk vision I have been a part of, if you can look past the glaring technical flaws of the city, whether it's the abandoned subway system they didn't finish because they didn't have time before release, characters just walking in circles and doing nothing. If you can get past that and let yourself be immersed in what's built, maybe find a street corner that's just actually functioning as it should, oh my lord, this game is truly next generation. I frequently was finding myself like getting out of my car, taking a moment to get my bearings, and then just watching as this like city breathed. And then there were other moments where like a car would load in a street like this, Or just two computers would just run into each other for a while. Like the cop AI. What the hell is wrong with the cop AI? It's inexcusable. So let's transition out of this into a couple negatives. The main voice performances were the worst in my opinion. And I know you're not supposed to rag on Keanu Reeves, but I found him to be extremely inconsistent with his performance as Johnny Silverhand. There were some times where it was like, yeah, he's a good actor, it's coming through. And then there were other times where like the one line of dialogue to the next felt extremely disconnected and not well put together. And I don't know if I should put that on Keanu Reeves or the actual technicians who put together all the dialogue sequences, but he suffered from that the most. And then the male V did not enjoy his performance as much as well. Not as much as Judy or Jack or anyone like that. Female V I found to do a bit better. I started a new campaign for female V for a little bit, got about like 10% in, and was like, okay, I think in general, she has a better performance. Everyone has touched on the bugs of the game again and again, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it, except to say for me, it broke the trust of the game. A lot of people hear that and they go, what, but no, listen, come here. The trust of a game is very important, because if you are constantly thinking, is that supposed to happen or it's a bug, absolutely dulls all enjoyment. Like there were times early on in the game where villains started like really rapidly teleporting, getting closer to me, and I was like, oh, that's a bug, because it didn't look super smooth, it looked unpolished, and it wasn't until like the third or fourth time I encountered an enemy doing that where I went, oh, that's supposed to happen. They have an ability where they're like zigzagging, teleporting towards me, because when they were doing it the first few times, they were going like into a bench, and then like in front of traffic in a way they should have died, and then in front of me, and I was like, oh, they're just rendering poorly. No, that was supposed to happen, it just happened wrong. As well as people just, delivering lines of dialogue while doing this, and approaching a window, and staring out the window, then snapping back to another pose. It just really suffered, and oh my lord, so many times I would wound someone, they'd get like stuck in a car, and then they'd just be talking at me while they're stuck in a car like, hey, you can't get away with this. I may be stuck in this Buick, but I'm gonna kill you. And then you just murder them. So if you're someone who cannot look past those things and needs to have some greater immersion, I would say for sure you're gonna have to wait 6 months to a year before you pick up Cyberpunk 2077, because it's broken on launch. It's just true, it is. I also have a lot of complaints with the economy of the game, with how a lot of the upgrading systems were handled. I won't get too much in here because it's kind of boring to talk about, but I just found it rather clunky and poorly communicated. A surprise positive for me though was combat. It started bad. I'm talking multiple generations old of game clunky bad. Yet, the better I got and the more upgraded I became, the smoother the entire experience. I think it should have started smoother. It starts like really bad shooter feeling, but as you integrate more technology, you upgrade your character, you really learn how to utilize the tech and quick hacks, then suddenly there's this whole other dimension to this combat I've yet to experience a game having like this. I'm going to say that's a positive that will start for most as a negative. I also was a big fan of using my vehicle as a weapon. I would just run people over a lot. I wish it would give me more experience for that. Didn't really. It was like, you didn't earn anything with that. I thought it was fun. I like to go. I've covered on the channel here through Fantasy News and several other series the development, the release, the concept of this game, and I would say as a whole looking back, I am whelmed. I'm not overwhelmed, I'm not underwhelmed. Because I kept my ear to the ground and was paying attention to the development and the news around this game so well, I pretty much knew what I was going to get into on launch. I didn't expect it to be as bad for previous gen consoles. I was playing this on a latest gen console, so it wasn't super rough for me. It was mostly visual bugs and crashes every hour or so. As a whole though, Cyberpunk is an achievement for gaming. In a way, it does showcase the potential of next-gen games. It hints at it, and you know it'll get there in a year. So my concluding thoughts are, Cyberpunk 2077 is genuinely great, and it will fully realize that greatness in a year. Until then, I don't recommend buying it. I actually think you need to exercise patience and get the Jedi way going, and know you have a lot of other games to get through, a ton of indie games that are totally complete on launch, and you'll have all of your bang buck right there, no forced refund and Sony taking it down. Try those, get into that, and next holiday season, get into Cyberpunk 2077. I think a lot of people could still enjoy it now, but I found myself constantly wondering how much more I would be enjoying this game if I was playing it when completed. And I plan on replaying it entirely probably in a year, so I don't have to watch Johnny Silverhand's cigarette float in front of my face after he's walked away for like 5 minutes. Anyway guys, like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. And have a good one, y'all. Peace.